Welcome to the Surviving Society collaborative and ongoing series with Sage Publishing's Social Science for Social Justice book series. This series reflects Sage's mission-driven approach to publishing by platforming emerging voices and enabling the dissemination of bold thinking that will inform the work of future generations of scholars and changemakers. In these episodes, we talk to authors from the book series about their research embedded in visions for social justice for all. I am really excited today to be joined by Rachell. We're going to be talking about slippery eugenics, an introduction to the critical studies of race, gender and coloniality. So much in a title, so much kind of like, well, a combination of excitement because I'm a nerd and I love this kind of work. Not saying that your work is nerdy, or I kind of am saying it's nerdy. We are nerds by proxy of being academics. We're nerds, aren't we? So we can say that. But like, when I read titles like that, I'm like, ooh, slippery. Like, not that eugenics should be something we're necessarily excited about, but when you use colloquialisms like that in academic work, it's like, oh, there's something more about this work. So yeah, Rachell, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very, very excited to be here.
Oh, brilliant. How are you doing today, Rachell? I was just saying to our studio manager as we came in, like, we're recording this. It's the end of May, isn't it? We're in the UK. It's very wet. It's that time of year in academia where things are a bit stressful. So sat here doing a podcast with you, it does feel like a little bit more of a break.
Yeah, it does. Especially because like I can take a break from the marking and making all of the reports. Yeah. I'm a nice marker, I promise.
Amazing. So, Rachell, eugenics, like, how did you come to this subject? Like, a bit about your kind of trajectory and your life so far as a scholar would be amazing for the listeners.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's a question that it goes beyond academic work and it goes beyond scholarship. I think in a very intersectional and very like Black feminist approach, like I think we all need to start from the body. We need to start from our subjectivities and our experiences. And like just to give you a little bit of background, I'm from Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States of America. Yeah, in a sense, like I saw eugenics and the legacies and continuations of eugenics as I grew up. For example, the majority of the adults that raised me like have been sterilized like by like different federal like programs and federal controls like that were made there to like regulate the bodies of like particular populations. And that was all part of like a program that pretty much started since the beginning of like US colonialism. So in a sense, like it like the topic kind of found me rather than me finding it. And I think in a sense, like it gives like a very intersectional like understanding of like how this processes of like race, gender, coloniality, sexuality, ableism, and classism like are all intersected. And while they don't like work or operate in exactly the same way, they're all operating in tandem with each other, I guess.
That's so powerful, Rachell. And I guess like just for the listeners, can you just give us a kind of like brief history into the eugenics in Puerto Rico?
Like eugenics starts as a term that was coined here in the UK. And it was coined by Francis Galton, who was an alumni from the University of Cambridge. And I think I feel the need to say that he almost flunked Cambridge. And he had the caucasity to publish a book titled Hereditary Genius in the 1860s, where he said that like people from like higher classes had this thing that was called eminence, right? Like, and it was like all of this like rhetoric was a way of making himself feel better about like himself and his position in the class system and in the broader like system of like coloniality, especially in the 19th century, in you know the UK as an empire. But as ideas often go, they do travel. The ways in which eugenics travel was through different conferences, different societies. And for example, in the particular case of the United States of America, the American Society of Eugenics was founded in 1922. So pretty much at the same time that after the Hispanic American and Cuban War in 1898, like they needed to find a convenient rationale for the subjugation of people of color, right? And I think they found it in a sense in eugenics and eugenic ideas. Just to give you an example, in 1903 in Puerto Rico, the island was pretty much like divided by four different like evangelical or Christian or Protestant churches, like as a way of like civilizing like Puerto Ricans, like through social hygiene programs that then become like the eugenic programs like more federally mandated that we see today. For example, in a 1968 study, it was shown that in Puerto Rico, 1 in 3 women were sterilized without their consent. Or, for example, Cornelius Rhodes said that he was like, he sent a letter where he states that like he injected like different patients with cancer cells, experiments with Agent Orange, the experiments with the contraceptive pill were made in Puerto Rico. So while, in a sense, like while white women in the global north saw the popularization of the contraceptive pill as a sexual revolution in the 1960s, this was only possible because of the colonial subjugation and the experiments that were done on particular women from a working class background that were usually like darker skin or Black women in a colonized setting in the global South.
Honestly, Rachel, like it doesn't ever shock me. We've been recording this podcast for nearly 8 years now, and it just doesn't shock. It never stops shocking me how deeply entrenched coloniality is in everything kind of related to quote unquote enlightenment and quote unquote human progress. Like where there's quote unquote human progress, or in this case the contraceptive pill, there's coloniality and there's subjugation. Like there's always a human is always at the core of the cause and effect, and that human is usually someone that's been deemed subhuman. So like thank you so much for bringing that history and that the contextualized history to our listeners and to me now, because yeah, like we have to keep remembering like how recent these things are, but also like when you're taking that contraceptive pill, understanding where it's coming from, where it came from.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like it has a longer history because of like this ideas of nationalism, like and the nation in and of itself is so entrenched with eugenic understandings because it was so popular at that point. So it was really hard even after like the term eugenics fell from grace, like it was very hard to like separate like this like ideas of like scientific racism more broadly as well as eugenics like with the making of the nation state. So like even in the way in which we think about certain things, like it is like very eugenic in its approach. And it goes beyond like technology and the way in which we self-regulate our bodies, but it has like different spaces that are operating like alongside each other in a sense. Like these sterilization programs like go at the same or go hand in hand with the experiments with the contraceptive pill, for example. There is a series of colleagues in the United States, Alexandra Stern, for example. She has this like amazing project that is called the Social Justice and Sterilization Lab. And basically what they've done in that project has been like collecting like different like bodies of data that have like pretty much shown that out of the 60,000 sterilizations, a third of them were done like targeting like Black and Latinx women, especially in California. So in that sense, like that is actually quite recent. Like I can say, like for example, like in the case of my parents were alive when this was happening. But even like today, like those things are still operating. For example, in the case of Peru from 1996 to 2000, more than 300,000 indigenous people were sterilized without their consent. And there has been like very little attention that it's being paid at those atrocities that are being committed right now. Or, for example, like only a couple of years ago during the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States, there were ICE detention centers, like especially one in the state of like in Georgia, where there were like targeting like this like migrant women to get like hysterectomy, so like without their consent or not like without their full consent, and that just happened like a year and a half ago. So there's a lot of things that are happening that are like operating alongside each other. And I think that's why eugenics or the legacies of eugenics is so important.
Oh, honestly, Rachel, thank you so much for that. Like, so much to think about, so much to be angry about, man. Like, it's just mad, like, how much goes on that people just don't know about. And I guess that's part of the work that we're doing now. That's our kind of contribution to knowledge production. But equally, it never stops feeling like frustrating. And I can't even imagine, like, for you as well, Rachel, like, just roll back slightly. And we like to do this on Surviving Society in terms of finding out a bit more about our scholars and who's writing these books. And I guess it'd be interesting to know your kind of trajectory to becoming an academic and becoming a writer, because you're at Cambridge now, so you're from Puerto Rico, come from Puerto Rico to Plague Island. What brings you here?
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, mate, I don't know either. I don't know why I'm here.
But I suffer with the food. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, sorry. I don't want to get too like making sweeping statements, but the food that you must be used to and put like we're suffering here.
No, I bring an entire suitcase of like sauces and seasoning and stuff like that. I cannot live without it, especially coffee. Coffee in this country, I don't understand it. I'm sorry, guys.
Oh, this is amazing. Anyway, yeah, tell us how do you get here, Rachel?
I think that's a really good question, right? Like, how does anybody get anywhere? So I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Puerto Rico. I think like one of like I did it in both. Like I did two simultaneous undergraduate degrees, one in history and the other one in political science. But I think like more than the classroom, like one of the things that taught me the most, like during my undergraduate degree, was that at the time that I got accepted into the university was on strike, pretty much like closed down for 10 months. And like within those like instances of social activism, like I think we were able to make like not only a collective living experience, but a form of collective learning. And I think that was very formative, like to my understanding of how the world works more than whatever was happening in the classroom. And then after that, I graduated from my undergraduate degree in 2014. And then I went to Columbia University in New York. And then for some reason, I ended up here in the UK. I thought I was only going to be here for 3 to 4 years for my PhD, but we're counting on year 9 now, and I'm still here.
Wow, yeah.
And I feel that now that I have a dog in a car, like I think
Yeah, you're
that's
stuck.
me just
Yeah,
staying.
yeah. Wow. Okay. So from Puerto Rico to Colombia to here. And I guess I feel like sometimes, particularly with scholars, academic writers that are doing this work on the broader, well, the continued impact on post-colonial societies of coloniality, that you kind of bring in a vision and an understanding of colonialism and empire in ways that I could only even like, I couldn't even touch the sides. Your perspective that brings in like a place-based perspective that I think only really having the lived experience can really bring that to the page.
I think there is like something about the lived experience that like, like not even the paper can hold as well.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in a sense like that creates like a very formative like understanding of how you view the world and how you view like this like intersectional and transnational dynamics to empire, the development of empire and coloniality more broadly. I think in a sense like one of the reasons why like I find decolonial theory so useful to my understanding is that decolonial theory like pretty much like starts from Latin America. So it has like those like particular beginnings, and it has like a beginning that is not theory for the sake of theory, is a theory that is like infused with like social justice and activism, which is very, very important. And I don't think that we should lose sight of those underpinnings and its beginnings as well. And I think as we're speaking right now, there's a lot going on in the world. So we need to talk about colonialism. We need to talk about the logics of empire and how, like violence like intersects like our everyday understanding of life and the lives of others as well, like along the like different social categories and access of oppression.
Yeah, I feel you, Rachel. And I think that more than ever, we do really need to be looking at the history of all this to understand where we are in the present. It seems like a really obvious thing to say, but like, well, for me personally, it isn't. Like, I always try to be very comfortable in the unknowing of social life. So even as we're always kind of hearing from different scholars and writers about their research, their work on histories of colonialism, of empire, race, class, gender. And like I always try and make a point of like never letting things kind of just wash over me, in that like trying to trying to emphasize the importance of all of this like constantly. And there's just always more for us to learn and understand. So I'm really grateful like that you've written this book as well, and that like you do have the kind of the lived experience as well. Like when I saw your book was on the list and I sort of did my reading about you, Rachel, I was like, oh, this is brilliant. Like it's so powerful having a scholar that is of the location, that is talking on the things, because academia, like I've got a lot of pals that write about topics and people and places that they're not necessarily from, and it's not a slight against you, but it is always very kind of nourishing to the soul when you hear about people that are writing about from the place of experience. So yeah, I just want to say that again to you, Rachel. Thank you so much for bringing that to this work. What is it about your research specifically that you feel is important? Now, I know we've basically spoke about that a lot on this episode so far, but like anything else that kind of comes to mind as well?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to see all of these things and how they operate alongside each other, even if they don't operate in the same way, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think it's important for everyone, not only our listeners, to understand about eugenics is that, like, a lot of people seem to understand eugenics as a thing of the past and a thing that,
Yeah.
like, we should get over it because, like, it's just done now and nobody uses eugenics anymore. But as I said before, because, like, the making of the modern nation state was so embedded in our understandings of like science and broader like understandings of scientific racism, it's really hard, or it was really hard, even after the atrocities committed by Nazi Germany in 1945, it was really hard to separate those two. So in a sense, like in the way in which the state operates, in the way in which like market-based technologies operate, in the way in which individual self-regulation operates, in a lot of the cases and a lot of times, like we are being regulated by like ideas of eugenics, even if the term is not being used at the moment. So I think like it's very important for us to like embark on that task of redefinition and try and understand what eugenics is, what like how like scientific racism is all around this. And while science and medicine and technology might seem objective and truth nowadays, like we see like all of those like processes of racialization, for example, in the way in which we create code and algorithms, like for example, or in the way in which we understand technologies like 23andMe and where you're really from and all of those
Yeah.
ideas, right?
What do you think about 23andMe, Rachel?
Well, that is a very complicated question, right? Because like I think the answer is a bit twofold.
Go on.
Um, for example, in the case of Brazil, Brazil is one of the last countries, at least in Latin America, to abolish slavery in 1886, 1888. I cannot remember too
That's
well
okay.
because I usually mix it up with Cuba. Sorry. One of the things that they first did once they achieved like independence, and I really am saying that with inverted commas here, they destroy all the legacies of like the slave trade, like to the point that they burn it to the ground. So like we have no way of knowing our past and knowing our history. So in that sense, like, I understand how people might use that, especially like people of color and Black people, to try and understand where are we from because of the violences of colonialism, because of those like particular like like necropolitics of coloniality, in lack of a better word or in lack of a better term. However, like I can understand how there is like a weaponization of those sort of identities as well. Mostly because like they don't particularly exist. Like race as a biological category does not exist. And a lot of people a lot of white people tend to say like, oh yeah, but it's fine because I'm A% this, even though that is not your lived experience. And that is a problem as well.
Mm.
Another problem that I see, like, especially with market-based like genomic technologies, is the way in which like we like are basically like selling, gifting them because we're paying ourselves of our genetic data and we don't really know where it's going to end up if they can technically sell it to third parties and stuff like that. So there is like a structural as well as like individual dynamics that come into the mix when using like technologies like 23andMe.
Like you said, like so many of us don't know our history, and like you do find yourself thinking like, I'd love to know. I want to know more.
Yeah.
So you can see like the pull of it is real, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's not easy to live with that, especially like when people from European descent can actually like trace their family history to God knows
Yeah.
when. But we really can't do that. Like, trust me, I've tried. And I've tried to make my family tree. Like, there's no way. Like, I think there you can find certain strands in others, but not all the story. So I can understand that can provide like some sort of like solace to certain individuals.
Yeah. No, definitely. So, Rachel, why should people outside of academia be interested in this particular subject?
Nowadays, like we have seen how, and I think Judith Butler has talked like more about this than me, obviously, but how the term gender like has been bracketed, how turfism is on the rise of populism, even the weaponization or the demonization in a sense of like critical race theory to the point that there is like different states in the United States that have made this illegal like already shows you like how this particular work in understanding or critically understanding like race, gender, and coloniality is so important because by like having anti-gender movements, by having transphobia, by having the rise of the far right or the demonization of critical race theory, what they're saying to us is that we are like questioning the very social fiber of white supremacy. And we need to keep doing that work in all of our different spheres of influence, that being in academia or outside of academia. And that is important work. So basically, what I'm trying to do here is to provide the tool set to understand that science is not that objective. And science often responds to like, ideas of like nationalism and white supremacy. And it's important to be mindful of that.
Oh, Rachel, thank you so much for that, because you do find yourself like in our kind of hyper marketized, capitalist, uncertain, global craziness of a world. Yeah, you do find yourself like you're searching for certainties, you're searching for answers, and you can see how people fall into basically an idolization of science above anything. Like science is the rational and the reason, but then as your book so clearly does, what others have done and what we're doing in this podcast is we're talking about there are people behind this work that have their own subjectivities that inform how they are making sense of what they're considering to be objective truth, which is so often loaded with gendered, racialized, colonial mindsets and reasonings. And I try to sometimes put myself in the position of those that seek to categorize us on the basis of these different structural formations in order to make themselves feel, I don't know, safe, or in order to have order in society, quote unquote order in society. And you can see like more than ever, like you mentioned, all the different, like the rise of the far right, rise of the TERFs, like it's fear, isn't it? It's fear that governs so much of their rhetoric, of their work, fear.
Yeah, and it's like this like understanding of like, love versus hate, what love for the nation means for hate for anything else that falls outside of their like myth or mythological idea of what the nation entails. And often, or more often than not, especially in places in the global south, in the global north, sorry, like it means white supremacy. It means empire. Like all of these ideas of like make America great again, which we're gonna have to contend with in the next couple of months, sadly enough, or the fact that like, like Brexit happen, all of
Yeah.
those things like respond to broader understandings of like not only fear, but that like love for that particular vision and understanding of the nation, which is what like, I don't know, a person like Sarah Ahmed would probably say
Yeah.
in the cultural politics of emotion.
Yeah. I love that book.
Yes, so good.
Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. Honestly, like,
Thank you very much for having me.
you've inspired me, but also like this stuff is depressing though, Rachel. It is. It's like, what's it? No, just to finish. Like, what is it like writing this work?
Yeah, writing the work is hard, but living it is harder.
Yes. And that's so important for you to say, because sometimes we'll be like, oh, woe is me, the academic writer. And actually, no. Like, as you say, living it is harder. We need to climb off our high horse and recognise that, yeah, the living is harder. Spot on. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, we'll be back next week. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Surviving Society.
To support our work, you can rate,
review and subscribe to host or produce a series of Surviving Society.
Get in touch with us via Twitter or Instagram.